So going back to the tutorial, the next step is to begin working on our CSS. So we need to create a new CSS file in public style sheets and call it landing.css. So if we go back here, we'll go to our public directory, open up style sheets, looks like it's already open. I'm going to right click, create a new file, and I'll call this one landing.css. Now if I open it up, it's blank and it's ready to be filled in with all the rules that will style our landing page. So back here, the first thing we want to do is open landing.css, which we've done, and we want to set the body's background color to black. You can choose any color you like. I just think that it looks nice to fade into the first image from a black background and then begin the crossfades from there. So I've pasted in this rule. What we've done is selected the body tag and then set the background color to #000, which is the same as black. So now we need to position the welcome text and the view all campgrounds button. We have it selected with an ID, so we're going to go ahead and use that ID selector, and that is landing-header. And what we've done here is we've taken this text and we've given it a z-index of 1. So if you don't know about z-index, basically the web page can be viewed on a three-dimensional plane. We have x and y, which is left and right, up and down, and then z, which is forward and backward into space. So if we give it a z-index of 1, it's coming forward towards us, and that will layer it on top of any other content that has a z-index smaller than 1. In order for us to be able to use the z-index, we have to change the position from something other than static. Static is the default position value for all HTML elements, and if you use static, it'll actually ignore the z-index. Now what we want to do is center the text and the button, so I just use text align center here, and that'll get it centered horizontally. Now, in order for us to center it vertically on the page, there's actually a lot of different ways to do this, but I've discovered that the easiest way to do it is just to use the view height. So what we do here is we set padding top to 40 view height. The reason I don't put it at 50 is because that would actually push the content down lower and it wouldn't look like it's centered. So we'll go ahead and save this rule, go back over here, refresh, and now you can see that the background is black and the welcome to YelpCamp text is centered on the page. And if we want, we can refresh here, see it a little bit better. So right now the welcome to YelpCamp text is barely visible, so we'll change that here in a second. And it looks like we just take the landing header selector, we add an H1 selector to it, and we change the color to white. So we'll add that here. So I'll go ahead and save that, refresh the page, and now it's a lot easier to see the text. And when we get the background in there, it'll be easier to see it as well. So the next thing we want to do is style the unordered list. And because the unordered list has a class of slideshow, it's very easy for us to select it. So I will take this rule and we'll plug it in here. So we've selected the unordered list with its class, and we set the position to fixed, the width and the height to 100%, so it'll take up the entire page. And then we nudge it up into the top left corner of the page using top and left with positions of 0. And then if you see here, we have the z-index set to 0. This will make sure that the background images are behind the other content, like our welcome to YelpCamp text and our view all campgrounds button. We also set our list style to none. This will remove the bullet points. That way we're not seeing them from the list items. And lastly, we want to make sure that there's no margin or padding, so we set those both to 0. Now if we save, we go back here and we refresh, we can see that the bullet points that were on the left hand side here have disappeared. Now we actually need to style the individual list items, so we'll pull this rule right here, copy it, bring it over into our CSS, paste it below the unordered list, and what we have here is the same dot slideshow, so the class selector for the unordered list, and then we're telling it to select each list item inside of the unordered list. Yet again, we set the width and the height to 100%. This time we position it absolute. Top and left are 0 again. The background size is set to cover, and this is what's going to allow the images to take up the entire space of the page. We also set our background position to 50%, 50%, and this will center the images perfectly on the page. And then lastly, we set the background repeat to no repeat. This way the images are not repeating vertically or horizontally. We set our opacity to 0 because we want our images to start faded out, and then we'll use the animation that we're going to create here in a little bit to slowly fade them into an opacity of 1. We set our z-index to 0. Yet again, this will make sure that the background images are placed behind the text and the button. The last property we have here is called animation, and this is something we haven't seen before. So this is going to allow us to actually fade the images in and out. So the name of the animation is image animation, and this is arbitrary. You can call it whatever you want as long as it matches up with the animation that we're going to create here in a minute. And then we tell the animation to last for 50 seconds. We make sure it's linear, and what linear means is it's just telling the animation to be the same speed from beginning to end. And lastly, we tell the animation to loop infinitely. That way our slideshow never ends. So we can save this, but if we preview it, nothing's going to show yet because we don't have the animation set up, and we also don't have any images set to the individual list items. So let's go ahead and do that now. So we're going to copy all of these slideshow, list item, nth child selectors, and this is what's going to add the background images to the actual list items. So now that I pasted it in, we can see that there are 5 list items starting with nth child 1 and going all the way through 5. We give each one a background image URL. And if you want, you can link to these locally. You can put the images inside of your public directory, inside of an images directory, but I've gone ahead and just uploaded them using Imager. This is a free uploading service on the web. It's not really intended for hosting images to use on your website, but it's a quick fix, so I went ahead and used it. The animation for the first background image is going to begin immediately, so we don't have to give it an animation delay. We want each image to fade in after 10 seconds of the previous image. So I set the next image animation delay to 10 seconds, and then we increment by 10 for every image thereafter. So 20 seconds for the third, 30 for the fourth, and 40 for the fifth, which will carry us all the way into 50 seconds, and then start back again at image number 1. So again, we can go ahead and save the landing.css file, but we're not going to see anything yet because all the opacities are set to 0, and we don't have the animation set up to fade them into 1. So we'll go ahead and do that now. So I'm going to copy the keyframes image animation rule from the tutorial and paste it in here. So what we're doing is taking the @keyframe selector and giving the animation the name of image animation, and this matches up with the earlier value that we had for the animation property on our slideshow list item rule. So now that we have that in place, what we'll do is indicate what we want to have happen at various keyframes within the animation. So the animation goes from 0% all the way to 100%, but we're only concerned with 0 through 30%. So what happens here is we start our animation at 0 for the opacity, and then all the way up through 10%, we let it fade in to an opacity of 1. We leave the opacity at 1 all the way through 20%, and then we fade it back out to 0 at 30%. You'll also notice that we have the property animation timing function set to ease in from 0 to 10, and then also at 10 set to ease out. So this gives us a more smooth transition as we fade in from 0 to 1. So you may be wondering where we came up with these percentages. So I went ahead and created a graph of the animation to help you better visualize what's happening here. So basically we have an image that will animate from 0 seconds to 10 seconds, and then the second image will go from 10 to 20, the third from 20 to 30, and then 30 to 40, and then 40 to 50, making up 5 images at 10 seconds apiece. So from 0 seconds to 10 seconds, we have a 5-second fade in, and then we have the image staying faded in at the opacity of 1, and then from 10 seconds to 15 seconds, we fade out into the next image. So this can be represented by blue, which is fade in, red, which is solid, and then fade out, which is orange. So if the first image goes from 0% to 10%, and that's fading in from 0 seconds to 5 seconds, and then it stays solid from 10% to 20%, so you see we have 10% to 20%, opacity 1, opacity 1, and then from 20% to 30%, it's actually fading from 1 back out to 0. And as that's happening, the next image, whose animation has already begun at 10 seconds, is going to be at 0 to 1 from 10 to 15, and that will overlap here, creating this crossfade effect. So then it stays solid for 5 seconds, and then we have another overlap as it fades out, and the next image fades in, and the same pattern repeats itself until we get to 50 seconds, which is the end of our animation. This image is solid, and then we go all the way back to the beginning where the original image gets faded in as the 5th image gets faded out, and then it starts all over again and loops infinitely. So let's go ahead and save our CSS and open up YelpCamp. Make sure your server is running and refresh, and we can see the animation live. So this image is visible for 5 seconds, and now it's going to fade out as the next image fades in. So that's a 5-second transition. We get 5 more seconds of this photo, and then it'll fade out into the next one. So the last thing we want to do is make sure that our background slider works on all browsers. So go back to the tutorial here, and at the very bottom I have this rule here. We'll copy it, bring it back into our CSS, paste it in at the bottom, and you see I've got this comment. It says older browsers support the no CSS animations class was added by Modernizer, and we already have the Modernizer CDN right here. If you want to know how I found that, I just looked up Modernizer CDN, and I picked the first one. So I just end up copying the minified version, and then I add it to a script tag in the head, and I set the script tag to async, which makes it so that this JavaScript will load simultaneously along with the other assets on the page. So if we go back to the CSS, we can see that they just have the opacity set to 1. So what will happen here is that browsers that do not support CSS animation will just have one slide visible, and that will be the background for that page. So that's it for our full screen background image slider. If you have any questions, just let me know, and we'll see you in the next video. Thanks.